"I'd love to help, Mom, but the kids have soccer." That's what he said. Not, "How are you feeling?" Not, "Can we bring you dinner?" Just that. Like my recovery was a scheduling conflict. So I healed alone. Slow, stiff, scared. And now I remember every detail. The first morning home from the hospital, I couldn't reach the kettle. The countertop felt like a mountaintop. I had to sit on a stool and breathe through the pain. My stitches pulled with every movement, and the house echoed in a way it never had before. It wasn't quiet, it was absence. Thick, layered, deliberate. I didn't expect a parade, but I thought someone might check in. A knock on the door, a message that wasn't automated. The only thing I heard was the mail slot, and even that was just bills and real estate flyers. One had a glossy photo of a house like mine. Great for families. I laughed at the irony. Then I cried, but only for a minute. Crying made my chest hurt. On the second day, I made it to the porch. Just 2 steps, one hand on the railing. I stood there in my robe looking at the empty driveway. No car pulled up. No familiar voice called out. A neighbor waved. I didn't wave back. I was too tired, too full of that awful knowing. They weren't coming, not tomorrow, not the day after. I was not a priority. I was a pit stop they'd decided to skip this time. Back inside, I boiled an egg. That was all I had the strength for. I ate it standing at the sink, like a woman in a house that didn't belong to her anymore. And yet, this was the house I bought with George. The one where my son took his first steps. The one they now talk about like it's already theirs. But here's the part they don't know. I'm still here. The painkillers made everything fuzzy, but the loneliness was sharp. It came in waves, during commercials, between boiled eggs at 2 a.m., when the hallway light felt too far from my bed. I'd shuffle in socks across the floor, each step a negotiation between courage and discomfort. My body moved like it no longer belonged to me, like I'd borrowed it from someone braver. On the third night, I spilled hot tea, trying to pour with my left hand. My right side was still too sore. The cup cracked on the counter, tea running down the cabinet like blood. I stood there, shaking, watching the mess, and I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I got the mop. I cleaned it up. Because no one else would. The house was too quiet for grief, too loud for peace. Every creak reminded me of what used to be. Footsteps rushing up the stairs, the back door slamming after school, George's whistle as he came in from the garage. All gone now. And in their place, the slow tick of a clock that didn't care whether I slept or cried. My phone sat beside me on the table like a dead limb. No missed calls. Just a few notifications, ads, reminders, some charity asking for money I didn't have. I scrolled through old photos for warmth. There was one of me and Matthew at the beach when he was 5. His hair was wild from the wind, and he held my hand like it was the only thing he trusted. I stared at that hand, frozen in time. When did he let go? On day 5, I tried calling. Just once. "Hi, it's Mom." "I'm doing okay. Just thought I'd check in." I paused, then hung up before finishing. What was the point? If he wanted to know how I was, he'd have asked. They sent flowers, yellow ones, with a printed card. "Get well soon. Love. The kids." I kept them out of pity. For myself. For them. They lasted 4 days. When I threw them out, the vase stayed on the counter, empty and clean. I started to write things down. Not out of sentiment, but because I was afraid I'd forget what it felt like. Not the surgery, the after. The silence. The truth of what it means to be left behind politely. By the end of the week, I could stand long enough to make soup. Lentil, from a can. I added pepper to pretend it was homemade. That's something I do now. Pretend. Pretend I'm not hurt. Pretend they meant well. Pretend I'm not counting the days since someone asked, "What do you need?" I needed a hug, a ride, a meal dropped off with a smile. Just something human. But all I got was soccer. And now I mark time in bowls and bruises and reminders on the fridge. I've been kind all my life. Patient. Generous. I made excuses for everyone. They're busy. Life is complicated. Don't take it personally. But I am taking it personally now. Because the recovery is slow, yes, but it's also revealing. Each quiet hour strips away some layer of illusion. And what's underneath? A woman who remembers everything. On the 7th day, I changed the sheets. It took nearly an hour. I rested 3 times, once sitting on the edge of the bed, once kneeling on the floor after the fitted sheet snapped back on me, and once just standing still, waiting for the wave of dizziness to pass. But I did it. I made the bed with my own hands. Clean sheets smell like dignity. That afternoon, I sat in the kitchen, eating toast that had gone a little stale. I looked at the drawer by the stove, the one with birthday cards. Dozens of them. Years and years of little messages. Best mom ever. Thanks for everything. One card from 3 years ago said, "We'd be lost without you." I remember reading that and smiling so wide it made my face hurt. It felt sincere. Now, I wonder, when did they start saying things they didn't mean? It's funny how your brain replays things once you're still long enough. All the memories you shrugged off before, suddenly they line up like dominoes. Like the time they forgot my birthday until 2 days later, then laughed it off with a bottle of wine I couldn't drink. Or the Christmas when I gave them a handmade quilt and they left it in the guest room closet for a year. Back then I told myself not to be petty, that love isn't measured in gestures. But it is. Of course it is. It's measured in calls made, time spent, chairs pulled out, hands held, casseroles delivered. It's in the showing up. And they've stopped showing up. The last time I fell, months before the surgery, I called Matthew. I wasn't badly hurt, just shaken. I remember his voice, distracted and clipped. "Well, what do you want me to do, Mom? I'm at work." I said, "I just needed to hear you." And he said, "Okay, well, I've got to go." Click. I forgave him, of course. Told myself I was being dramatic. But now I look at that moment differently. It was a little rip in the cloth. And the cloth's been fraying ever since. Even the way he brings the grandkids over feels performative. They walk in like tourists. Ruby barely looks up from her phone. Jackson once asked, "Why do you keep your house like a museum?" I laughed then. I shouldn't have. I should have said, "Because I remember a time when people respected the things they were given." Last Easter, Madeline brought a store-bought pie and a new set of rules. No sweets for the kids, no religious talk, no political discussion. I nodded. I always nod. I'm the peacekeeper, the peacemaker, the invisible one, but not anymore. Last night I took out the box from the hall closet, the one labeled important. It's where I keep the will, the deed, the insurance, the copies of letters George and I once signed. I sat on the floor with my back against the washing machine and read every line like scripture. The house is mine, free and clear. Paid off 20 years ago. I remember the final payment. George took me out for ice cream, said, "Now we really own something." I wish he were here now. He'd understand what I'm thinking. Matthew once said, "We'll take good care of the house when it's ours." Not if. When. I didn't answer then. I just smiled. I'd gotten good at that. Smiling instead of speaking. but I'm not smiling anymore. That night I slept better. No pills, no crying. Just a quiet mind and the weight of a decision starting to take shape. It felt good, strong, like I was slowly reclaiming something I hadn't even realized I'd given away. Tomorrow, I'm going to the bank. The woman at the bank wore a red blazer and kind eyes. Her name tag read Alicia, and she didn't blink when I said I wanted to review my will. Just nodded and motioned me to sit down, like I was any other woman trying to put her life back in order. Maybe I was. I laid out the documents carefully, smoothing the creases. It had been years since I'd looked at them. George's signature was still there, strong and deliberate. Mine beside it, smaller, neater. I used to take pride in that. The steadiness of my hand. We'd written that will when Matthew was in college, back when he still called me Mama sometimes, back when I believed proximity meant closeness. We left everything to him. There wasn't much at the time, just the house, the old car, the savings account we added to with every holiday we skipped. Any recent changes in your situation? Alicia asked gently. I thought about saying, yes, I learned I'm disposable. But instead, I said, my husband passed, years ago, and I've just had surgery. I realized I need to reconsider a few things. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe every woman over 60 who walks into this bank has her own version of this conversation. I'd like to revoke the existing will, I said, steady as stone, and draft a new one. The house is no longer going to my son. A pause. Of course, she said. No questions. Just quiet professionalism. She opened her drawer, pulled out a folder. We can start from scratch. Is there a new beneficiary in mind? Yes, I said, but I'd like that kept confidential for now. I didn't have a name yet. Not really. But I knew it wouldn't be Matthew. Afterwards, I walked across the street to the diner. The one with the faded red booths and bitter coffee that tastes like memory. I sat by the window and stirred sugar into my cup, slowly, like I used to do with George. He always said sugar dissolved better if you stirred clockwise. I never corrected him. I watched a mother outside buckle her toddler into a car seat. She moved fast, with practiced hands, the way I used to. For a second, I saw myself in her. The energy, the focus, the invisible weight. We give so much, we don't notice when it's gone. On the walk home, my legs ached, but my spine stayed straight. I passed the big oak tree where Matthew used to build forts. It still had the notch where George carved our initials. I stopped and touched it with my fingertips. The bark was rough, real. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. At home, I folded laundry. Slowly, precisely. My body still healing, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. I thought about all the times I'd left messages and didn't hear back. All the "sorry, busy this week" texts. The birthdays reduced to emojis. The visits cut short. It's not just the surgery that's healing. It's the delusion that family always means care. I no longer believe in that. And strangely, that feels like freedom. It was Sunday when Matthew finally showed up. I heard the car before I saw it. Too fast up the drive, like he wanted to get this over with. I was in the kitchen, folding dish towels. He didn't knock, just walked in like he still owned the place, which in his mind, I suppose he did. "Mom," he said, loud and breezy, like nothing was wrong, like it hadn't been 2 full weeks of silence. I turned slowly, let the towel rest on the counter. Matthew. He held a brown paper bag, one of those takeout ones with greasy corners. "Brought you soup. From that place you like, the one on Hillcrest." He didn't ask how I was. Didn't look too closely. Just placed the bag on the table like it absolved him. I opened it. Carrot and ginger, store-bought, no spoon. "Thank you," I said, because some parts of me were still trained that way. He looked around, hands in his jacket pockets. "Place looks good, clean, as it always does. Kids have been swamped. Ruby made varsity. Jackson's doing robotics now." I nodded, waited. "And Madeline's been working extra shifts. Promotion on the line." More nodding, more waiting. He cleared his throat. "We were thinking, once you're feeling better, maybe you'd like to come over for dinner. Just us. Keep it easy." My fingers tightened slightly on the counter's edge. That would be nice. Not a word about the surgery. Not a single acknowledgement of the recovery I've done, every inch earned without them. But dinner? Now that the hard part's over, they remember I exist. He walked to the window, looked out toward the yard like he used to when he was in trouble. We were also talking about the house. There it was. I said nothing. Let the silence spread. He rushed in to fill it. "Just long term, you know? You're doing great now, but down the line, well, it's a lot to maintain. We were thinking, maybe we start planning ahead. So it's not all on you." I nearly laughed. Planning ahead for a house they've already assigned to themselves. "I see," I said softly. "And if we did some updates, new roof, maybe a ramp just in case, it would make sense to put things in our name. Easier for everyone." He still couldn't look at me. "You've been so generous," he added quickly. "We just want to make sure things are handled before there's a crisis." Crisis. That's what I've become in his mind. A ticking problem to preemptively solve. I walked over to the table, picked up the soup, carried it to the fridge. "I'm not planning on a crisis," I said, my back to him. "Not anymore." He paused, maybe catching something in my tone. "You okay, Mom?" I turned then, met his eyes. "Never better." He blinked, nodded once. "Good. Great." There was nothing left to say. He left a few minutes later saying they'd call me later this week. I didn't hold my breath. After he was gone, I sat in my chair by the window, the one George used to call my thinking spot. Outside, a squirrel darted across the lawn. The wind picked up, tossing leaves against the glass, and in that moment, I felt clearer than I had in years. They hadn't come when I needed help, but now they show up with soup and paperwork. This isn't about care, it's about claim. But this house, it's not an inheritance, it's a witness, and I decide who sees it last. The hospital smelled like lemon disinfectant and fatigue. I walked through the sliding doors slowly, cane in hand, coat buttoned to the top. It was just a follow-up appointment. Routine, they said. But something about walking back into that building made my chest tighten. I remembered the surgery day clearly, the blur of the gurney, the cold of the pre-op room, the nurse's reassuring voice. The moment they asked if someone was waiting for me outside, I'd said, "No, it's just me." And she'd paused, just a flicker, then moved on like that wasn't a tragedy. It had been 12 days since anyone checked on how I was healing. 12 days since anyone asked about my pain or my sleep or my breath at night. Matthew never even asked what the procedure had involved, as if cutting into a body that birthed him was just another item on a long list of forgettable errands. The nurse today was young, with bright sneakers and careful eyes. She helped me onto the exam table with a tenderness that almost made me cry. Almost. But I didn't. I've learned to keep my tears for places no one sees. "You're healing beautifully," the doctor said after examining the scar. "Remarkably well, actually." I nodded, said thank you. Didn't mention the nights I'd woken gasping, the days I'd forced myself to walk laps around the living room just to keep the blood moving. Any help at home? No, I said. Do you need someone? No, I said again, firmer this time, because I did need someone. But needing and asking are two different things, and when the first need is met with silence, you stop asking. After the appointment, I walked to the pharmacy alone. The wind had picked up and made my eyes water. I told myself it was the cold. At the register, a woman my age stood ahead of me with her daughter, middle-aged, confident, still fussing over which vitamins her mother needed. They laughed together. The daughter took her coat, steered her by the elbow. I stood behind them, invisible. Again. When I stepped out onto the sidewalk, I paused, looked up at the pale winter sky. There were birds moving fast above the power lines, tight and fast, like they were escaping something. I envied them. Back home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the kitchen. The quiet greeted me like an old friend. Then I reached for the drawer where the folder from the bank now lived. The house was worth more than I thought. Prices in the neighborhood had risen over the years, quietly. I'd paid it off so long ago that I never tracked its value. But Alicia had. She'd circled the estimate in blue ink. She'd said, "It could change your life. Change your life." At 79. I stared at that number for a long time. Then I opened the drawer beneath it, the one filled with old photos. Matthew as a baby, toothless and pink. His first school portrait, graduation, wedding. I stopped at one particular picture. Me holding him at age 3, both of us sunburned, laughing on the beach. He's clutching my neck like I was the whole world. Where did she go? That version of me. Where did he? The phone rang. I let it. Madeline's voice on the machine. "Hey, just checking if you need anything this week. We might swing by Saturday if the kids don't have games." If. I erased the message. Later that night, I sat with the deed in my lap. I imagined them opening mail one day, expecting to see their future handed to them on a silver platter, and instead, nothing. No keys, no title, no explanation. Just a space where entitlement used to live. Because if you ask me now how I'm healing, I'll tell you this. The body is slower than the heart. But the heart, when it gets angry enough, it doesn't limp. It walks straight to the edge of what used to be love, and then it jumps. On Tuesday, I made an appointment with a realtor. Her name was Natalie. She had one of those clipped, efficient voices and wore a coat that looked more expensive than my car. But her eyes were sharp, and when she shook my hand, she didn't soften her grip for my age. I liked her immediately. "Can I ask?" she said. "Why now?" I watched her toe sink slightly into the rug by the front door. She was already mentally staging the space, imagining throw pillows and candles. I wondered if she pictured me in the photos, or someone younger. "I'm considering a change," I said. She smiled politely, but I saw the thought pass across her face. Someone put pressure on her. Probably the sun. I didn't correct her. We walked through the rooms together. She commented on the natural light, the condition of the wood floors, the potential for renovation. "Buyers love original kitchens these days," she said, running her manicured nails along the cabinet edge. "Gives a house character." I stayed silent. She stopped at the hallway. "You have a very lived-in home." I smiled at that. "Yes, it's been lived in." She turned. "Is your family involved in the sale?" "No," I said. "They're not aware." Natalie raised one brow, not in judgment, just interest. "That's unusual." I folded my arms. "So is abandoning your mother after surgery." To her credit, she didn't flinch, just nodded slowly. Fair. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea while she reviewed comps and numbers. I knew the market had shifted. She said we could list quickly, no open houses necessary if I preferred. She had buyers waiting. All cash offers possible. It all sounded clinical, fast, clean, just the way I wanted it. Let's do it, I said. She blinked, then smiled. Okay. And that was that. Years of memory, of effort, of fixing pipes and patching the roof and repainting the porch. That house was already shifting in my mind, becoming a transaction instead of a home. That night, I packed 2 boxes. Only 2. The first held papers, banking documents, insurance, my passport. The second held photos. Not all of them, just the ones that still felt like they had breath in them. George's smile, my dog Daisy in her sweater. One of Matthew, before his face changed into the man who forgot how to ask, "Do you need help?" I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt exact. Every movement had purpose. Fold, tape, label. At midnight, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around. I thought the walls might feel closer, that the house would try to cling to me. But it didn't. It had been waiting for me to let go. I whispered, "Thank you." Then I turned off the light and slept without waking once. Her name was Lorraine. I met her at the pharmacy 6 months ago. 2 older women reaching for the same bottle of joint cream, then laughing at ourselves. We'd had coffee once, then again, and by the 3rd time she knew more about my medical history than my son did. Lorraine was a widow, like me, lived in a small apartment above a nail salon, and kept her life simple. Crossword puzzles, strong opinions, 1 cat named Charles. She didn't ask many questions, but she listened like someone who had earned the right to say nothing. That kind of presence is rare. I called her the day after I signed the paperwork with the realtor. "Coffee?" I asked. "Come over," she said. Her place smelled like lemon oil and onion soup. She had jazz playing on a low volume, something brassy and sad. I sat at her little kitchen table while she poured us both a cup. "You look like a woman who just made a big decision," she said. I did. "Family know?" "No." She raised 1 eyebrow. "Good." I smiled. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." She stirred her coffee. "You don't owe them anything." It wasn't said with bitterness, just clarity, the kind of truth that doesn't need decoration. "They think the house is already theirs," I said. "Madeline mentioned remodeling the guest bathroom, someday. Matthew once asked if I'd mind a skylight in the hallway." Lorraine snorted. "Did they also ask when you'd be dead?" I laughed, sharper than I meant to. But it felt good. "They weren't cruel," I said quietly. "Just distant. Forgetful in ways that add up. Neglect doesn't have to be violent," she said. "Sometimes it's just consistent." That sentence sat with me. Consistent neglect. All those missed calls. Late birthdays. Dinners postponed indefinitely. The way they'd stopped hugging me with both arms. I took a sip of coffee. It was too hot, but I didn't mind. "I've always believed in giving quietly," I said. "Helping without keeping score." Lorraine nodded. "That's noble. Until it becomes invisible." We sat in silence a while. Charles the cat jumped onto the table and sat like a little emperor between us. "I don't know where I'll go yet," I admitted. "The realtor thinks it'll sell quickly. I might rent for a while. Maybe by the lake." "Do it," she said. "Do something selfish for once." That word, selfish. It used to feel like a slur. Now it felt like a key. I looked at Lorraine, this sharp, scrappy woman who had made peace with living above a nail salon, who hadn't spoken to her children in 4 years by her own choice. "How did you know you were done?" I asked. She tilted her head. I stopped hoping they'd call, and when I realized I didn't feel sad about it, I just felt free. That was it. That night, I went home and stood in the hallway. I looked at the family photos on the wall, the wedding portraits, the school pictures, Matthew in every stage of life. My arms around him like a guarantee. I took them all down, one by one, and for the first time in years, the hallway looked like mine. The kitchen clock clicked past 11 when the knock came. Not urgent, not loud. Just a polite little tap, like someone trying not to disturb. I opened the door to find Jackson on the porch. My grandson. 12 years old, hoodie too big, sneakers muddy, a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked surprised that I was the one who answered, which made me wonder what he'd expected. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I answered. "Everything all right?" He shifted. "Mom dropped me off early, said she had a conference call." I let him in, though something about it didn't sit right. Jackson hadn't been over in weeks, not since before the surgery, and now he was here with his backpack and no plan. He pulled out a juice box from his pocket and sat at the kitchen table like nothing had changed. I made toast, gave him half, sat down across from him. "You know," he said through a mouthful, "Dad says when the house is ours, he's going to knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room." I froze. The sentence came so casually, so clean, like it had been said more than once, like it was already decided. "What do you mean, when the house is yours?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Just something Dad says. That after everything settles down, we can make some changes." I stared at the boy who used to crawl into my lap and ask for stories, who once cried when I left early after babysitting, who now talked about this place like it was a future construction site. "Did your dad say that to you?" He nodded, taking another sip of juice. "Yeah. He said it's already kind of ours, you know, since Grandma's getting older and all." I turned to the sink, washed my hands even though they weren't dirty. "What else has he said?" Jackson was quiet for a moment. "Just stuff, like how he wants to make it into a home office. And maybe let Ruby have the back room. Mom wants to repaint everything white." Repaint everything white. Erase the colors I chose, the curtains I sewed by hand, the blue wall George painted for our 25th anniversary. They wanted to flatten it all out, smooth it into something generic, something theirs. And me? I was the inconvenience standing between them and their remodel. "Did he say when?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Not really," Jackson said. "He just said, soon, probably, once everything's in place." In place, like I was a chair being moved out. I turned back to him and smiled. "Well, that'll be interesting." He nodded, not sensing anything off, just eating toast, just repeating what he'd heard. They talk about me like I'm already gone, not even with cruelty, just with assumption. And that, somehow, is worse. That night, after Jackson had been picked up, no explanation, just Madeline's text. "Thanks. Crazy day." I went into the living room and sat in my chair. I didn't cry, didn't rage. I opened the notebook I'd started keeping after the surgery. Page 1, Meds schedule. Page 23, Lorraine's quote, "Neglect doesn't have to be violent. Sometimes it's just consistent." Page 37, Realtor contact, listing timeline, inspection date. Page 41, he said, "When the house is ours." I wrote it down slowly. Then I wrote underneath, "They don't know I've already left, and I haven't moved yet, but I've already gone." The realtor called on Thursday. Her voice held the kind of energy reserved for news with commas and dollar signs. "We have an offer," she said, "above asking. Cash. No contingencies. I didn't blink. How soon do they want to close? They're ready in 10 days, 2 weeks, if needed. I looked out the window. The oak tree was starting to shed. Its branches had thinned just enough to see the sky behind them. Autumn creeping in, quiet and deliberate. "Let's do 10, I said. Natalie hesitated. "You're sure?" "I am." She exhaled, almost relieved. "Okay, I'll draw up the acceptance." After we hung up, I sat for a while. No music, no TV, just the ticking of the hallway clock and the occasional creak of wood shifting in the walls. This house had always talked to me in little sounds. I used to find them comforting. Now they sounded like farewells. I started packing in earnest. Not the sentimental things, I'd done that already. No, this was the cleaning kind of packing, the sorting, the sifting, the throwing away. Bags for goodwill, boxes for the dump. One corner of the living room quickly became a graveyard of what no longer served me. In the hall closet, I found a pair of Matthew's old cleats, still caked with dried mud. I held them for a moment, thumb grazing the cracked leather. There was a time he'd cried over those shoes, desperate to make the soccer team. George had stayed up late, gluing the sole back together. I remember how proud Matthew was when he made the team. I left the shoes in the donation pile. In the guest bedroom, the one Ruby once used during her sleepovers, I found a stack of coloring books. Half-finished pages, bright pink unicorns, glittered outlines. I remembered her lying on her stomach, legs swinging, asking, "Do you think unicorns cry, Grandma?" "No," I'd said. "They don't need to." I put the books in a box labeled, "Give to Library." I moved slower than I used to, but I didn't stop. The rhythm of packing became its own kind of therapy. Not a shedding, exactly. More like a distillation. What do I carry forward? What do I release? That night, I wrote my new address in a small notebook. A one-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex near the lake. Lorraine had helped me find it. "Nothing fancy," she'd said, "but the light is good in the mornings." That was enough. I hadn't told Matthew, or Madeline, or the kids. They still thought I was recovering. They didn't know I'd recovered into someone they no longer recognized. I placed the envelope with the new lease into the folder from the bank. Next to the updated will. Next to the termination of the power of attorney Matthew once insisted on, just in case. The house, the money, the decisions, all mine again. At midnight, I stood barefoot in the kitchen. The fridge buzzed gently behind me. I ran my hand across the cool countertop one last time. They had plans for this place. Skylights, white walls, open concept. But they never asked what I planned, and that was their mistake. I met with the notary on a Tuesday afternoon. Her office was tucked behind a dry cleaner's, just a narrow room with a ticking wall clock and a water cooler that hadn't been cleaned since spring. Her name was Evelyn. Late 60s, crisp linen blouse, eyes like slate. We didn't exchange pleasantries, just the work. She handed me the stack of papers. "This revokes the prior will," she said, tapping the first page. "This confirms your new beneficiary." I nodded. "And this," she said, placing the final document in front of me, "officially removes your son's access to any financial power regarding your estate." The pen felt heavier than it should have. "I take it you've thought this through?" she asked. I looked at her. "Every night for 3 weeks." Evelyn didn't blink. "Good." I signed. There's a moment after ink hits paper when the world doesn't shift, but you do. Not with noise, not with vengeance, but with weight. Like something you've carried for too long finally sits down beside you and says, "There. That's done." I walked out of her office into the afternoon light and didn't feel guilt. Only air. The next day, the sale closed. Natalie called in the morning. "It's done," she said. "Funds are being wired now." She paused. "Do you want me to deliver the keys?" I shook my head, though she couldn't see me. "They're on the counter. The buyers can find them." And just like that, the house was no longer mine. I thought I'd cry. But I didn't. The tears had long dried into resolve. That afternoon, I took a cab to my new apartment. The driver didn't ask questions, just helped me load 2 suitcases and 3 boxes into the trunk. My whole life reduced to what mattered. The complex was small, 2 stories, pale green siding, and a line of tidy shrubs that tried their best. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh paint. My unit was on the 2nd floor, apartment 2B. When I opened the door, the room was filled with quiet sun. It wasn't large, but it was clean. White walls, warm floors, a kitchen just big enough for one. The windows looked out onto a narrow strip of lake and a line of pine trees. I stood for a long time just looking at them, letting the stillness enter me. That evening, I made tea. Real tea, not instant. Poured it into my 1 good cup and sat on the small balcony, wrapped in a shawl Lorraine had knitted years ago. I listened to the wind brushing against the branches. I let my breath settle. There was no noise, no door slamming, no TV blaring from the other room. Just me. Later, I unpacked slowly. 1 photo of George on the nightstand. The quilt from our old bed, now folded neatly over a chair. My books lined up in a single row, less than I used to own, but enough. At midnight, I turned off the lights and stood in the doorway, looking back at the little living room. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was somewhere I belonged. No one knew where I was. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Saturday morning, I went to the post office. The letter had been sealed for 3 days. White envelope, thick paper, printed text. No return address. I handed it to the clerk, paid for tracking, and watched him stamp it like it was any other piece of mail. It wasn't. Inside was a simple note. "Matthew, I've sold the house. I no longer live there. Please do not try to find me. I am safe. I am well. And I am no longer yours to assume. Mother." No anger, no accusations, just facts. Let them sit with that. Let them drive up next weekend with paint samples and tools, ready to measure the wall between kitchen and dining room, only to find another family living there. A toddler's bike in the driveway, a wind chime on the porch. No trace of me. Let them knock. Let the new owner say, "Sorry, who?" I pictured it clearly. Matthew turning to Madeline, confused. Madeline dialing my number with that tight-lipped tension she always wore when something didn't go her way. I had turned off the number, canceled the plan, new carrier, new SIM. They would find only silence. And maybe, for the first time, they would really listen to it. That afternoon, I unpacked the last of the kitchen items, just a small set. 1 pan, 1 pot, 2 plates, 2 mugs. Minimalist by necessity. But somehow, it made everything feel intentional. I boiled pasta, added olive oil and garlic, sat by the window and ate with the lake just barely visible through the trees. The breeze lifted the corner of the curtain, and I let it. Let everything shift. Let everything move. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger had left weeks ago. What remained was a kind of stillness I didn't know I'd craved. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just quiet. That night, Lorraine came over with a pie she'd bought at a farmer's market. "It's not homemade," she said, "but it's peach, and I didn't feel like eating it alone." We sat on the balcony, wrapped in shawls, 2 women with unshared griefs and fully shared silences. "I sent the letter," I told her. She didn't ask what it said. She just nodded. "Took me 3 tries when I did mine. First two were too polite. I smiled. Mine was not. Good. We ate pie with spoons from the tub, no plates. The sunset slipped behind the pines in long ribbons of orange. I think, I said, they thought I'd always wait. They all do, she said, until you don't. At one point, Charles the cat jumped onto her lap, curling into the crook of her elbow like he belonged there. She didn't push him away. She just kept eating. After she left, I sat for a long time in the dark, listening to the wind, the small clicks of cooling furniture, my own breath. I thought about legacy, how it's not in the things we leave behind, but in what we refuse to carry anymore. The first morning in October, I woke up before the sun. The light here arrives slowly, through pine needles and thin clouds, brushing the windows in soft gray. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, wrapped in my robe, holding a warm mug between both hands. There was no sound but the faint hum of the refrigerator and a bird I hadn't yet learned the name of. I didn't miss the house. I missed the woman I'd been in it, the one who waited at windows, who asked for so little and was told, somehow, that even that was too much. I missed her the way we miss old shoes, comfortable, broken in, but ultimately replaced when the walking wears through. At 9, I called the library. They were taking donations again. I packed a small box of books, children's stories, old cookbooks, a few novels I'd outgrown. The librarian's voice was warm. She said they'd be glad to have them. I walked there slowly, carrying the box like something sacred. On the way, I passed a woman about my age planting chrysanthemums along the sidewalk. She looked up and smiled. "Beautiful morning," she said. "It is," I answered. And it was. At the library, a young volunteer took the box and asked if I wanted a receipt for taxes. "No," I said, "thank you." Then added, "Keep the unicorn one. My granddaughter once colored every page like it mattered." She didn't ask why I wasn't giving it to her directly. She just nodded. Small mercies. On my way home, I stopped at a cafe Lorraine had recommended. It was bright and small, the kind of place with chalkboard menus and chipped mugs that feel like old friends. I ordered tea and sat by the window. A woman next to me was reading a paperback, her lipstick worn down to a pink echo. She looked up once and gave me that half smile women give each other when they recognize something unnamed but familiar. After she left, I stayed, watched people pass by. No one knew me. No one expected anything of me. There was no timeline, no assumed role, just presence. Later, I bought groceries, milk, apples, a small wedge of cheese. Enough for one person, 2 if Lorraine visited. At home, I put everything away slowly, with care. I had stopped rushing. The apartment already felt like mine, not borrowed, not transitional. Mine. That evening, Lorraine called. "Still alive?" she asked. "Barely," I said. "I had to talk to a teenager who thinks milk should be sold in oat form." "God help us all." We laughed. Then she said, "You sound different." I paused. "I feel settled." There was a silence. Then, "That's dangerous. You'll start enjoying yourself." "I already have." We hung up. I stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the light fade. The trees swayed gently, as if nodding in approval. In the drawer by the sink, I kept a photo of George. Just one. Him in the garage, holding a wrench, grinning like he'd built the world. Sometimes I talked to him, just a line or two. "You'd like it here," I said that night. And I think he would have. Not because it was grand, but because it was mine. No one called. No one came by. I didn't check the mailbox until after dark. Inside, a bill, a flyer, and a postcard from Lorraine. sent before she even called. It said, "Freedom looks good on you." It was Madeline who came first. I imagined the scene as it happened. Her car pulling into the driveway, the tires skimming over the same cracks I used to ask Matthew to patch. Her heels clicking on the porch. The key, still on her ring, slipping into the lock like muscle memory. And then, the silence, the stillness, the realization. I pictured her standing there, one manicured hand still on the doorknob, eyes sweeping over the empty living room. No rug, no lamp, no vase of wilting flowers on the table. Just echo. Then the voices. Matthew's behind her, louder, already frustrated. What the hell? Where's her stuff? I imagined them splitting up. Madeline going to the kitchen, checking the fridge. Matthew storming down the hallway, throwing open the closet doors. Finding nothing, not even a single hanger. The letter would have been in the mailbox. It wasn't dramatic. I hadn't left it on the mantel. I wasn't staging a performance. It was folded neatly in a plain envelope, addressed simply, Matthew and Madeline. I sold the house. Please do not contact me. This was not a decision made in anger, but in clarity. Live your lives. I will live mine. Mother. I imagined him reading it aloud, then again, quietly, then folding it too quickly, like paper could be shut the way you shut a conversation. What they felt in that moment didn't concern me. Surprise, most likely. Not sorrow, not real sorrow. That takes root over time. But shock, confusion, maybe even embarrassment. Who sells a house without telling their own son? I do. The phone never rang. The old number had long since been canceled, but I'd checked the account. They hadn't tried. No email either. No letter. Not even from the kids. Which told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't come looking for me. They'd come for the house. And when it was gone, they left. I was sitting on the balcony when Lorraine knocked, holding 2 croissants in a paper bag, wearing her wide-brimmed hat like someone who still hoped for sun in October. Well? She asked, sitting down without waiting for an answer. I passed her a cup of coffee. No word, I said. She bit into the croissant. Good. We sat like that for a while, watching the pines. A bird landed on the railing, then hopped away. I thought I'd feel guilty, I said eventually. You don't? I don't feel anything. She nodded. That's how you know you did the right thing. When nothing bleeds after. It wasn't that I didn't remember the good things. I did. The birthdays, the small hands, the laughter in the backyard. They were real. They were once. But love without care becomes nostalgia. And nostalgia is not enough to build a life around. That night, I opened the last box. Inside, George's watch, my wedding ring. One letter he'd written the year before he died. I didn't reread it. I didn't need to. I knew it by heart. He'd ended it with, "Whatever you choose, I trust you to know what's right." I whispered. I did. Then I closed the box, put it on the shelf, and made myself a cup of tea. The lake was always quiet before 7. I'd started walking down to it in the early mornings, just me and the cane I barely needed anymore. The path was soft underfoot, a trail of pine needles and damp earth. A few squirrels darted past. Sometimes I'd see a jogger, but we never spoke. I preferred it that way. The bench near the edge of the water had become mine. No one claimed it, but I sat there often enough that the shape of my body seemed to linger in the wood. I brought my thermos, my scarf, my stillness. I watched the mist rise off the lake like a secret being kept. It had been 2 weeks since I left the house. 3 since I sent the letter. 43 days since the surgery. I counted. Not because I was waiting for something to happen, but because I wanted to remember exactly how long it took to feel whole again, not just in body, but in truth. One morning, I brought a book with me, not to read, just to hold. It was one of George's old favorites, a story about a man who spends his whole life building something that no one understands until after he's gone. When I first read it, I thought it was sad. Now, I thought it was honest. I didn't hear from Matthew. Not a call, not a message, not even a second-hand attempt through one of the kids. Some might have seen that as tragedy. I saw it as proof. Proof that I had not misjudged. Proof that what I'd built my anger on had foundation. They hadn't loved me less, exactly. They had simply stopped noticing I was a person. There's a difference. They'd loved the role I played. The giver, the reliable one, the backdrop to their lives. But when I stepped out of the frame, they didn't follow. They just paused, blinked, and recentered the picture. I'd lived most of my life believing love meant staying. Now I knew better. Sometimes, love means leaving first. Not to punish, to protect. Lorraine once said, "We're not too old to begin again. We're just too tired of doing it for the wrong people." She was right. I had begun again, small, quiet, entirely mine. A library card, a balcony garden, a new pair of walking shoes. No apologies, no explanations. Sometimes I caught myself humming in the kitchen. Sometimes I danced with Charles the cat when Lorraine brought him over because her landlord was spraying for ants. I started sending letters again, real ones, handwritten, to friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Most of them wrote back. The ones who didn't? That was fine, too. Life filters what you need if you let it. And in that small apartment, with its chipped tile and warm light, I rediscovered something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace without permission. Not the kind that's granted or scheduled, but the kind that arrives when you finally stop performing worthiness. I was not anyone's inheritance. I was not their burden, their placeholder, their historical footnote. I was a woman who had done her best. And when her best was no longer enough to warrant care, she chose herself instead. That is not cruelty. That is reclamation. So if you're reading this, if you've ever stood in a kitchen alone, wondering why no one knocked, why no one called, why you were easier to forget than to love, hear me. You are not wrong. You are not crazy. And you are not done. You can still leave the house they assumed would be theirs. You can still sell the story they wrote for you. You can still build a new one with silence, with strength, with softness that asks nothing in return. Because peace is not owed. It is claimed. And it is never too late to claim yours. If this story spoke to you, share it. Send it to someone who needs to feel less alone. Leave a comment. Your voice might be the very thing another woman's been waiting to hear.